In the arid landscapes of the Arabian Peninsula during the 7th century, immense changes were reshaping society, faith, and politics. It was a land of harsh deserts and scattered oases, dotted with trade routes that connected distant empires. Camel caravans traversed these dusty roads, carrying spices, textiles, and precious metals to be traded at bustling marketplaces. Within this environment lay the great town of Mecca, a commercial hub and spiritual center, home to the revered Kaaba. By the early 600s, a new voice began to resonate in Mecca, a voice preaching the oneness of God and a moral order that challenged entrenched tribal customs. It was the voice of the Prophet Muhammad, calling his people to a faith that came to be known as Islam. Within a few years of his initial revelations, Prophet Muhammad gathered a small group of followers. Though small in number, these believers displayed remarkable devotion. Islam taught a radical message for its time, that the multitude of idols worshipped by Meccans held no true power, and that all humanity was equal under the one God, known in Arabic as Allah. This teaching threatened the power structures upheld by the elite of Mecca, who derived prestige and economic benefits from the polytheistic pilgrimages to the Kaaba. Tensions escalated between the new Muslims and the city's leadership, especially among the influential tribe of Quraysh. Soon, persecution became the daily reality for Muslims in Mecca, culminating in abuse, economic boycotts, and even attempts on the Prophet's life. In response to the mounting hostility, Prophet Muhammad instructed many of his followers to migrate to more hospitable lands. Some ventured across the Red Sea to Abyssinia, seeking asylum under the Christian king there. Ultimately, however, the most decisive move came in 622 AD, the Hijra, or migration, to the city of Yathrib, later called Medina. This migration was not just a flight from danger, it was the start of a new chapter in which Muslims would be free to practice their faith openly and organize as a community. In Medina, Prophet Muhammad's role expanded beyond spiritual leadership. He became a statesman, forging alliances with local tribes, both Jewish and Arab, through a charter that established a new type of society grounded in mutual defense and shared responsibilities. Yet Mecca was never far from the minds of the emigrants. They had left behind homes, property, and in many cases, family. Meanwhile, the Quraysh in Mecca did not see the Muslims' departure as an end to hostilities. Instead, it fueled their anger. They deemed the new Muslim state in Medina a direct threat to their dominance. Tensions continued to smolder. Trade caravans, the lifeblood of Mecca's economy, were often forced to pass near Medina. In a world where wealth and survival hinged upon control of trade routes, the Medinans' control of territory posed new questions for the Meccans. Would their caravans remain safe? Would the growing power of the Muslims eventually strangle Meccan commerce altogether? The months following the Hijra saw small-scale conflicts and raiding expeditions, often revolving around caravan routes. Muslim forces, though still quite small, occasionally challenged Meccan convoys to disrupt trade and recoup what had been confiscated from the exiled believers. The Quraysh responded with attempts at sabotage within Medina and alliances intended to encircle the Muslims. Both sides engaged in a strategic dance, each seeking advantage without risking an all-out confrontation. But the combination of unresolved grudges, ideological differences, and the delicate balance of power in Western Arabia made a decisive battle increasingly likely. It was merely a matter of when and where. In the year 624 AD, rumors circulated that a particularly large caravan led by Abu Sufyan, a prominent Meccan leader, would be returning from the Levant, Greater Syria, to Mecca. Laden with goods and accompanied by armed guards, this caravan promised substantial profit to Meccan investors. Word reached the Prophet Muhammad in Medina that this caravan was vulnerable. Eager to strike a blow against Mecca's economic might, the Muslims considered intercepting the convoy, potentially forcing the Meccans to negotiate or reconsider their aggression. The idea was to level the playing field. Such a move could also recover some of the wealth lost by the Muslim emigrants who had been forced to leave their assets behind in Mecca. Abu Sufyan, keenly aware of the danger, quickly dispatched messengers to Mecca, urging reinforcements. The Quraysh responded with alarm and determination. A formidable Meccan force was assembled. Estimates mention somewhere around 1,000 fighters, though exact numbers vary in historical sources. Their objective was to protect the caravan and then teach the Muslims a lesson they would never forget. Meanwhile, the Muslim community in Medina was debating whether to act. The Prophet Muhammad called upon those willing to confront the Meccan threat. He did not impose an obligation on everyone to join. Rather, volunteers stepped forward. Approximately 300 or so Muslims readied themselves, a stark contrast to the larger and better-equipped Meccan army. While preparing, the Muslims learned that Abu Sufyan's caravan had altered its route, likely bypassing the territory near Medina entirely. Still, the notion of returning to Medina without challenging Meccan aggression gnawed at them, especially because the very presence of a large Meccan force marching in their vicinity was an act of provocation. Soon, a consensus formed around the idea that an open confrontation was inevitable. Whether the immediate threat was a caravan or a troop, the broader message was clear. The Meccans were unwilling to let the Muslims exist in peace. Concluding that they must meet this threat before it reached the gates of their city, the Muslims marched out to a site near the wells of Badr, near the coast south of Medina. The wells of Badr were a strategic location. In the deserts of Arabia, control of water sources could be the difference between victory and defeat. Badr's wells provided a reliable supply of water, which traveling armies could scarcely afford to neglect. The Muslims arrived first, establishing their position by one of the main wells. Scouts reported the approach of the Meccan army, looming in the distance like a looming storm cloud. Tension coursed through the Muslim ranks. The disparity in numbers was stark. The Meccans fielded more cavalry, better arms, and were better supplied. Yet the Muslims believed they had a moral imperative and divine support. Their resolve hardened with the knowledge that turning back now would only invite future assaults at times more advantageous to the enemy. While these preparations took shape on the ground, it is said that the Prophet Muhammad sought guidance. He implored divine assistance and counsel from his closest companions. The context in which they found themselves was extraordinary. 300 against a force more than triple their size. Many had never engaged in a large-scale battle before. They were farmers, tradesmen, and recent converts who had known more about forging a fledgling community than waging war. Still, a sense of unity and camaraderie bound them together. Their leadership was cohesive, and their cause appeared just in their eyes: survival, faith, and the defense of their new home. From the Meccan perspective, the impending clash at Badr was not merely about retrieving a caravan, it was about stamping out a movement that threatened the social and economic equilibrium. The Quraysh felt humiliated that a smaller faction, exiled only a couple of years prior, had grown so bold. For them, this was the moment to quell the rising tide of Islam once and for all. Their camp was filled with skilled warriors from powerful clans. They had known battlefield success in previous tribal conflicts. Confidence buzzed in their ranks as they set up tents, strategized, and recounted tales of their ancestors' valor. As dawn neared, both camps stirred with apprehension. The night sky over Badr was awash in stars, a silent witness to the swirling tides of destiny. On the Muslim side, watchers guarded the wells, and monitored any movements from the enemy. Spiritual devotion ran deep. Many prayed fervently, seeking moral and psychological fortitude. On the Meccan side, plans were drawn. They believed overwhelming force would quickly scatter the Muslims. Some even boasted of how the confrontation might last only a brief hour before victory was theirs. No one doubted that the initial advantage lay with the larger, better-equipped force. When morning's light finally broke, the terrain around Badr revealed itself. Sandy expanses interrupted by rocky outcrops, pockets of water near the wells, and the imposing lines of the Meccan force arrayed in formation. The Prophet Muhammad is said to have arranged the Muslim ranks with precision, ensuring each individual had a role. They did not depend solely on numbers or arms. They relied on discipline and trust. Among them were key companions who had stood by the Prophet through adversity. Their presence steadied the lines, as lesser experienced fighters felt courage bloom in the face of imminent danger. In Arabian warfare tradition, single combat often preceded the main clash. Warriors from each side stepped forward, challenging the other's champions. The Meccans, confident in their prowess, sent out respected fighters from among the Quraysh. The Muslims responded by selecting individuals known for their bravery and lineage. Brief but intense duels unfolded, swords flashing in the desert sun, each stroke accompanied by the tension of hundreds of onlookers. Early success in these duels could ignite morale. Initially, the advantage went to the Muslims, surprising the Meccans and instilling in the smaller force a crucial spark of self-belief. With the conclusion of the single combats, the broader conflict ignited. Under the clarion of tribal war cries, dust billowed as men charged forward. The clang of steel on steel echoed across the plain. Spearmen tried to create a forest of points, defending themselves from cavalry surges. Archers attempted to find vantage points among shallow dunes. The swirl of battle coalesced into chaotic pockets of fighting, each swirl of men seeking an opening or a momentary weakness. Despite their smaller numbers, the Muslims held their ground. Their lines did not crumble. Instead, they formed a cohesive front that surprised the far larger Meccan force. The Prophet Muhammad, though not among the front ranks where swords clashed, is described in historical accounts as guiding from behind, offering strategic commands and constant encouragement. He prayed continuously, beseeching victory from God, yet also ensuring that his men maintained discipline. Orders were relayed through key companions who barked instructions to maintain formations, avoid reckless pursuits, and coordinate effectively. Where the Meccan cavalry tried to turn the flanks, Muslim defenders adapted by closing ranks and keeping archers at the ready. In many ways, these tactics were new to Arabian warfare, more reminiscent of disciplined military formations than the sporadic tribal raids of the past. As the battle raged, the morale of both sides was tested. On the Meccan side, the plan for a swift, overpowering victory began to falter. Their lines met an unexpected resilience among the Muslims. Skirmishes dragged out longer, causing confusion and frustration. Leaders from Mecca shouted for renewed pushes, aware that time favored the smaller force if they could hold steady. Meanwhile, the Muslims drew strength from their faith. They believed that angels were aiding them, a conviction that spread through their ranks like wildfire, fueling determination. Whenever exhaustion threatened to overpower a fighter, he found renewed vigor in the sense of higher purpose. Hour by hour, the balance tilted. Not only did the Muslims manage to repel the initial onslaught, they started to push forward. Exposed sections of the Meccan army began to waver, particularly among those who had never encountered such resistance from a numerically inferior foe. Some within the Quraysh ranks felt doubts churn in their hearts. In typical tribal warfare, Overwhelming superiority guaranteed swift victory, so the stalemate was jarring. Abu Jahl, one of the most vehement enemies of the new faith, rode among the Meccan fighters, issuing urgent commands for unity, urging them not to falter. But bits and pieces of the line were already unraveling. Casualties began to mount on both sides. Bodies lay scattered in the hot sand, the wounded cried for water, and the relentless sun climbed higher. Yet, in the midst of this, the Muslims pressed their advantage. Key Meccan leaders who had spurred the hostility against Islam from the outset fell in combat. Among them was Abu Jahl himself. His death carried immense symbolic weight. For years, he had stood as a principal antagonist, mocking the Prophet and orchestrating persecutions. His demise struck a blow to Meccan morale, signaling that their leadership was compromised. Faced with the loss of pivotal figures and the sustained pressure from the surprisingly effective Muslim ranks, the Meccan army began to crack. Some warriors turned to flee, while others put up pockets of desperate resistance. As confusion spread, the Prophet Muhammad saw an opportunity to drive home the victory. He instructed his forces to remain disciplined, to keep pressing forward, but avoid descending into recklessness. Swiftness and caution merged as many Meccan fighters either surrendered or tried to escape. The tide had fully turned. What had started as a seemingly doomed confrontation for the Muslims was now being written into history as a decisive triumph. By midday, the Meccan army was in full retreat. The dust-choked battlefield lay strewn with the reminders of the fierce morning's fight. The Muslims captured prisoners, gathered spoils, and tended to their own fallen. Elation mingled with sorrow, for though victorious, they had lost friends and kin. Many knelt on the scorching sand to thank God for what they perceived as divine deliverance. In their view, the victory at Badr was a clear sign that their cause was blessed. It validated the idea that they need not fear even the strongest of foes if they stood firm and placed trust in God's assistance. When news of the outcome reached Medina, celebrations erupted among the Muslim community. The improbable had occurred. A small band of believers had bested the might of Mecca's elite warriors. The moral and psychological impact was tremendous. Many Arab tribes observing the conflict from the sidelines were forced to reconsider their stance toward the Prophet and his followers. If this band of believers could overcome such odds, might they indeed have been supported by something beyond human calculation? Diplomatically, the victory gave Muslims much-needed clout. Local tribes and distant settlements grew more willing to ally with Medina, shifting the political landscape of Arabia. Mecca, on the other hand, was stunned. Families mourned the loss of leading figures, and anxiety rippled through the merchant class, which thrived on the region's trade. The bitterness of defeat gave rise to an even deeper desire for revenge. Badr might have been a victory for the Muslims, but it also ignited fresh determination among the Quraysh to regroup and retaliate. In the months that followed, Meccan leaders rallied more clans, increased funding for weapons, and planned future assaults against Medina. The immediate aftermath of Badr foreshadowed that the conflict was far from over. Within the Muslim ranks, the victory at Badr forged a collective identity grounded in shared sacrifice and mutual respect. The Prophet Muhammad reinforced that prisoners of war should be treated with dignity, a principle that stood in stark contrast to some prevailing norms of warfare in the region. The spoils captured, which included weapons, armor, and merchandise, were distributed according to a fair system outlined by the Prophet. Every participant, from the experienced warriors to those who merely stood guard, received their portion. Such inclusive practices deepened the sense of community, ensuring that no one felt overlooked or undervalued. Meanwhile, theological reflections on Badr echoed throughout the Muslim world. As the first major battle after the Hijrah, it bore significance that extended beyond mere geopolitics. For believers, Badr symbolized the fulfillment of promises that righteousness would prevail, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. Passages in the Quran alluded to angelic intervention, describing how the faithful were aided by forces unseen. This narrative became a spiritual anchor for Muslims across generations, illustrating that steadfastness and belief could realign the trajectory of history. In sermons, recitations, and tribal gatherings, the memory of Badr was invoked to inspire courage and unity. The victory also revealed early glimpses of how the Prophet Muhammad envisioned moral and social behavior in times of conflict. Accounts mention that captives were sometimes ransomed back to Mecca, but those unable to pay were allowed to earn freedom through teaching literacy to the unlettered in Medina. This policy enriched the community's knowledge base while adhering to principles of compassion. The willingness to incorporate ex-opponents into Muslim society, provided they showed sincerity, was emblematic of an inclusive ethos. Such details, while overshadowed by the epic nature of the victory, contributed to shaping the early Islamic community's structure and values. Politically, Badr served as a catalyst for the Prophet's continued leadership evolution. He had led the defense of Medina effectively, forging a confederation of believers and indigenous tribes who found common cause. Many local clans recognized his emerging authority, aligning themselves with Islam, or at least respecting its political might. This helped secure Medina from internal threats, though external ones would remain persistent. The alliances established after Badr facilitated the later expansion of Islam across Arabia. In the tapestry of the Prophet's life, Badr stands as a turning point where faith and community coalesced into a force capable of guiding a new societal order. Yet the euphoria of triumph could not erase the reality of ongoing danger. Skirmishes continued on various fronts, with Mecca steadily planning its revenge. The next major confrontation, Uhud, loomed on the horizon. Many Muslims who felt invincible after Badr would be jolted by the harsh lesson that no single victory could guarantee permanent safety. Nevertheless, Badr's memory persisted, both as a source of pride and a reminder of what unwavering dedication could achieve. The Prophet Muhammad frequently invoked the lessons of the battle, reminding his followers that victory was not to be taken for granted, but rather earned through integrity, preparation, and faith. The strategic ramifications of Badr rippled across the Arabian Peninsula. Tribes in the region operated on finely tuned calculations of power and loyalty. Prior to Badr, many had watched the conflict between Mecca and Medina from the sidelines, uncertain whether the Muslims were merely a transient group destined to be crushed. After the battle, ambassadors from Medina found a more receptive audience. Even tribes traditionally aligned with Mecca saw the potential benefits of neutrality or alliances with the Prophet. At the same time, Meccan envoys worked fervently to secure fresh commitments from allies, emphasizing that Badr was just a temporary setback, not the end of the campaign. Over the coming months, the Prophet Muhammad demonstrated skillful diplomacy. While Badr showcased military prowess, it also opened doors to negotiation. Many clans preferred to avoid the chaos of warfare if they could secure beneficial treaties instead. Medina's new image as a power center made the Prophet's proposals appealing. He offered protective accords, fair trade conditions, and mutual support agreements. In a tribal world with no overarching government, such deals were vital for collective security. Here, too, we see how Badr shaped more than just armies and battlefield outcomes. It helped forge the diplomatic fabric of Western Arabia. Back in Medina, day-to-day life was nonetheless tinged with the memory of those lost at Badr. Graves had been dug, final prayers recited, and families mourned beloved sons, fathers, and brothers who never returned. The Muslim community rallied around the bereaved, offering comfort and material support. The sense of unity that had forged in the crucible of battle deepened in times of shared sorrow. Charitable acts multiplied, often orchestrated by the Prophet himself, who emphasized social welfare as an essential part of Islamic practice. Within a few years, these communal bonds would underpin the larger expansions of Islam, ensuring that victories were not merely martial, but also civil and moral. From the vantage of history, Badr stands out as a clear shift in the fortunes of early Islam. Had the Muslims fallen that day, their nascent community might have been extinguished, relegated to a minor footnote in the tribal chronicle of Arabia. Instead, the victory at Badr propelled Islam onto a broader historical stage. This moment elevated the Prophet Muhammad's leadership from a local phenomenon to a regional force. The stories of the battle, relayed by travelers, poets, and eventually written compilers, emphasized themes of courage against odds, the role of divine providence, and the unity of believers. In subsequent years, the Meccans tried repeatedly to restore their shaken dominance. The battles of Uhud and the Trench, Khandaq, would test the resilience of the Muslim community further. Victories, losses, alliances, and treaties followed in a tapestry of complex interactions. Yet Badr remained unique in the collective memory, an inaugural proof that faith and resolve could overcome numeric disadvantage. The psychological impact was incalculable. A tribe once mocked and persecuted had now forced the proud Quraysh to reckon with a new reality. This shift in perception also affected the morale of the believers, who confidently invited others to join the faith. The survival and growth of Islam hinged on both spiritual and worldly factors. Badr underscored that while believers prayed for divine support, they also prepared strategically, scouted effectively, and fought valiantly. It was not mere fate, but a combination of steadfast hearts and united ranks that carried the day. In the verses and oral traditions that followed, the narrative integrated moral lessons, such as the importance of humility, the need to avoid complacency, and the call to remain just, even in victory. The Prophet was said to remind his followers, if Badr taught them that God could grant success, it also meant they should remain ever vigilant and grateful. In Mecca, the aftermath brought political reconfigurations. The vacuum left by slain leaders opened opportunities for new personalities, who molded anti-Muslim sentiments into a renewed campaign. The city's economy still relied heavily on caravans, and they spared no effort in securing future routes and punishing tribes suspected of collusion with Medina. This led to a cycle of revenge raids. Both sides engaged in diplomatic outreach, forging alliances among the desert tribes, some of whom saw a chance to play the two powers against each other for their own benefit. Arabia had become a chessboard of shifting loyalties. Among the Muslims, Badr quickly became a symbol in Friday sermons and daily conversation. It taught that alliances, skill, and above all, unity could prevail, even when the world seemed aligned against them. The survivors of Badr, known as the Badriyun, gained enormous respect within the Muslim community. Their deeds were recounted around campfires, in trade caravans, and eventually in the pages of Islamic history. Though not all participants became famous by name, their shared valor enshrined them in the cultural consciousness. Even the Prophet Muhammad is reported to have honored the Badriyun with a special reverence in later years, recognizing the singular risk they took at that pivotal moment. In the region's broader timeline, Badr fits into the narrative of Arab unity that would later lead to Islamic expansion beyond the peninsula. Once fiercely divided tribes found themselves gradually integrated into a larger ummah, or community of believers. Though not every group converted immediately, many found advantage in aligning with a robust state that could protect them and foster commerce. Badr signaled the possibility that the new faith was more than a localized creed. It was a force capable of reshaping geopolitical realities. By the end of the Prophet's life, most of Arabia would come under the banner of Islam, due in part to the momentum sparked at Badr. The spiritual dimension of the battle remains profound for Muslims worldwide. Centuries later, Badr is still remembered in the context of Ramadan, as it took place during the holy month. Sermons, lectures, and religious texts draw moral lessons from how a community in its infancy overcame adversity. These lessons emphasize moral conduct, reliance on divine help, compassion towards enemies once they are subdued, and the overarching principle that faith must guide action. Hence, Badr's legacy transcends the desert sands of 624 AD, living on in hearts and minds as a hallmark of what faith and determination can achieve. For historians, Badr offers a case study in asymmetrical warfare, highlighting how smaller forces can triumph with a blend of superior leadership, discipline, and morale. The historical sources, ranging from early biographical works, seerah, to hadith literature, paint a picture that blends both factual accounts and the spiritual convictions of the early Muslims. While the exact details vary, the consensus acknowledges Badr's pivotal role in the Prophet's life and in the subsequent trajectory of Islam. Archaeological research in the region has sought to identify the exact site of the wells and the routes taken by the armies, though definitive findings remain subject to scholarly debate. Ultimately, the Battle of Badr stands as one of history's turning points. A small community, formed under persecution, faced off against a dominant faction that sought its eradication. The improbable victory sent ripples far beyond the immediate participants, influencing tribal loyalties, reshaping diplomatic alignments, and inspiring a new religious community to realize its destiny. In the annals of world history, Badr is frequently cited as the moment when Islam secured its foundation, transitioning from a persecuted minority to a formidable political and spiritual force. Though the desert sands may have long since shifted over the battleground, the memory of Badr endures, illuminating the power of conviction in the face of overwhelming odds.